For an arcade-style platformer released in 2001, Super Monkey Ball naturally has a rich and fascinating history when it comes to high scores. Its straightforward objective of collecting bananas and rolling into the goal as fast as possible has proven to be so simple yet so addictive, it spawned a high score competition that's been active for the past 22 years. In this time, hundreds of players have come along to challenge and improve world records on the game's 118 floors, and contributed to shaping the world record progression in a variety of ways. However, amongst all the high score history to consider, there is one player that for me clearly stands out as the greatest of all time. A player that some of you have probably heard of and had no idea was previously involved with Monkey Ball or video game high scores at all, Packattack. While he is now best known for his walkthroughs of Lego and Mario games, for a long time, Packattack was one of the most prolific and talented participants in this field of competition. In his almost 10 years spent competing in Monkey Ball games, he was the best player around by a wide margin. His level of skill at certain facets of the game was so far ahead of any legitimate player, he completely dominated the overall rankings without much sustained challenge, and set multiple scores in the early 2000s that remain unbeaten today, despite immense persistence and dedication from his competitors. In the most extreme cases, only one other player would eventually replicate the extremely difficult strategies Packattack was capable of, and come anywhere close to competing with him. Consequently, Packattack has always been an inspirational figure to the community, and revered by many as some kind of Monkey Ball god for the seemingly impossible high scores he set during the game's infancy. However, just like the great god ape of lore, Kong, Packattack's reputation would ultimately plummet as if shot from the Empire State Building. Following the discovery the only player to rival his most impressive scores was in fact a chronic cheater who'd been at large for over 10 years, Packattack's apparent level of skill suddenly started to seem far too good to be true. Given the game's history of difficult to enforce rulings and lackluster proof requirements, the prospect of Packattack having cheated was entirely plausible. As such, an investigation was launched with the goal of unearthing the truth about his insane high scores. With the majority of the scores in question being set in the early 2000s, the investigation required lunging deep into the dust-sepulchered archives to find any information pertinent to the case. This included digging up a 20-year-old VHS tape of never-before-seen replays from Packattack, an exhibit which proved to be some of the most incriminating evidence against his legitimacy. This is the suspicious legacy of Packattack, purportedly the greatest player in Super Monkey Ball history. Packattack's story begins on the 1st of January 2002, when he created his account on Clo.net, the first dedicated website for tracking Monkey Ball high scores and home of the SMB Elite. Packattack took no hesitation in establishing himself as the best player around, and swiftly began claiming new records at an unprecedented rate. In the earliest available archive of the overall rankings, a leaderboard determined by the players' sum of scores across all their individual level submissions, Packattack is already sitting comfortably at the top, a position he would go on to successfully defend and maintain for the entire time he actively competed. At times, he even came within touching distance of a complete sweep of every practice mode record in the game, an outright domination of the overall rankings. As well as competing on Clo, Packattack also submitted his scores to Cyberscore, another video game high score website established in 2002. Though the charts on Cyberscore were definitely the less popular option for Monkey Ball players while they coexisted with the SMB Elite, they eventually became the main leaderboards for Monkey Ball scores after both Clo.net and its successor, Elite Scores, ultimately shut down by 2012. Although Cyberscore worked as a fitting replacement, there was one distinct difference in that the key metric for the overall rankings was no longer the total sum of scores, but a medal table determined by how highly players ranked on each individual chart. With packattack being one of the earliest adopters of the site, having joined shortly after its inception, it should come as no surprise he had also been effortlessly leading their medal table for the better part of the past decade. That being said, it's evident that packattack's prime days rolling primates elapsed during his time competing on Clo, as this is when he set his most memorable and legendary scores that defined his legacy as a Monkey Ball god. Though his long reign as the dominating force in Monkey Ball is incredibly impressive in itself, it was always his most outstanding scores that were regarded as his crowning achievements, as this is where his natural talent and seemingly effortless proficiency at the game's most demanding skills shone through. His scores of 35,980 on Advanced 11 and 26,422 on Expert 9 are the two scores that have always stood out as his best, primarily because of a specific obstacle these floors each contain, the notorious 0.1 wire. These wires are the narrowest paths found anywhere in the game, being only a tenth of the diameter of the ball, and, ignoring the final stretch of Master 9, are only ever offered as an optional challenge. Due to its turns, the 0.1 path on E9 in particular is widely regarded as the toughest obstacle in any Monkey Ball game, requiring intense concentration and extremely precise movement to successfully traverse, something some experienced competitors have still yet to do. Taking these paths is absolutely imperative for achieving a top score, as there are thousands of points worth of bananas on offer for completing them, and the faster you go, the higher your score. The rightmost path on A11 also concludes with a green warp goal, rewarding the player with a 10,000 point bonus for finishing in it, or a 20,000 point bonus if you're fast enough to finish with over half the given time remaining to earn the time bonus. The raw difficulty of balancing along these paths is what makes any score that completes them so outstandingly impressive, especially so at higher speeds. Only a small group of players have devoted enough time and patience to hone the necessary dexterity to take heavy advantage of the bananas on these paths, and yet, packattack's old scores from 20 years ago make everyone else's efforts look, ironically, fruitless. On A11, the strategy packattack used bears almost no semblance to the next best score, as he somehow manages to stabilize himself on these wires after a series of extremely unlikely and unpredictable bounces. Towards the end, he even clips over to and lands directly on the rightmost 0.1 path, barely keeping his balance to make it over to the goal. When this score was set in February 2003, it surpassed second place by over 2,000 points, an almost unheard of deviation in a game where most record improvements are only in the single or double digits. Today, the score still stands 1,300 points ahead of second place, the biggest difference between first and second place on any floor in the game, and largely the result of how unfathomably difficult and unlikely pulling off this strategy is. That being said, the level of skill required to achieve his E9 score is equally insane, and his scores on this floor specifically were the most important to scrutinize in the context of the investigation. Here, packattack performed a strategy aptly known as the 26k strat, as completing it results in scores in the 26,000 range. It's a slight variation of the more lenient 25k strat, collecting an extra 1,000 points from a bunch on the 0.3 path at the start, before traversing the 0.1 and 0.2 paths fast enough to finish with the time bonus. Simply watching this replay should be sufficient to see how ridiculous this score is, and it wasn't until last year that another player would complete a newer, even more lenient version of the 25k strat, the product of 200 hours of attempts on that floor. Needless to say, packattack's ability to maintain balance on these razor-thin paths is unparalleled, something only he has been able to do with such proficiency, and the same can be said for another of his skills held in high regard, edge grinding. This is a technique where the player can gain extra speed by riding the inside of curved platforms. It is extremely precise, and as such is rarely ever seen performed outside of tool-assisted runs. In the few cases where edge grinds have been implemented in high scores, it's been on a very small scale and in situations where the player can keep throwing attempts at the floor until they line themselves up just right to grind a curve without needing to make any kind of adjustment, effectively gambling until they get lucky with their alignment. For Packattack and his superhuman reflexes, this was just another skill only he could do, and he used it to set multiple scores where he rode enormous curves for long durations, whilst making adjustments to keep himself balanced. A far cry from what anyone else on the planet is capable of. Some noteworthy examples include E7, E12 and E32, three more strategies no other player has performed with a remotely comparable level of expertise. And of course, most notably and insanely of all, his edge grinds on the curves of the E9.1 wire. When it comes to situations like this, where one player vastly and consistently outperforms everyone else at the hardest aspects of the game, it's to be expected their scores will raise some level of suspicion amongst players, especially so when their accomplishments from within 2 years of the game's release still vastly outperform the top players from today. So why was it that it took 20 years before the penny dropped, and current players started to doubt the authenticity of Packattack's scores? Truth be told, while Packattack's scores have always been considered very impressive, they haven't always been viewed exactly as I've just outlined. As you may know by now, in late 2021, a document was published detailing the most extensive cheating scandal the Monkey Ball community has ever seen. The meticulous investigation provided damning evidence that a large number of scores from jcool114, someone thought to be one of the game's all-time greatest players, had been achieved using methods of pause abuse, illegal techniques that are banned from high-score competition. The most prominent discovery was that jcool's live record of 26,902 on E9 was spliced and performed using rapid pausing, a technique where players can slow down gameplay by rapidly and repeatedly pausing the game, increasing their reaction window and making difficult strategies significantly easier with no negative impact on their score. The technique is by far the most beneficial for strategies that require careful and precise movement, such as wire balancing and edge grinding. With the technique in play, players can roll, dance and grind along point 1 paths with minimal effort, completely trivializing the most skill-demanding obstacles the game has to offer, and strategies that have taken players hundreds of hours to pull off in real time can easily be replicated in a matter of minutes. Because rapid pausing majorly diminishes any sense of achievement or improvement from playing, completely removes any kind of meaningful competition, and reduces gameplay down to little more than spamming the pause button, it has always been met with overwhelming distaste by the community. The point of competition is the competition, not the scores themselves. If we only cared about getting the best possible score, then we would all just be tassing runs on emulators. Although the community was right to look down on and discourage rapid pausing, for years there was no proof requirement in place to effectively combat players from abusing it. Back when high score competition first started in 2001, players weren't expected to provide any kind of proof of their scores at all. The entire rankings operated purely on an honor system. Once more players acquired means of capturing their gameplay, as well as server space to post their videos to, in-game replays became the ad hoc standard for proving scores. While it was obviously more convenient to simply save replays of your best scores than have to capture hours worth of live attempts in practice mode, in-game replays do not show nor explicitly indicate any pausing done during the live attempt, making the only known method of cheating incredibly easy to do and get away with. It wasn't until as recently as 2020 that the rulings would eventually change to require live runs from practice mode, otherwise known as live plays, in an effort to combat pause abuse, but this is still not a requirement for proving scores on Cyberscore to this day, despite my asking. As such, a lot of the current player base discredits that site as an accurate record of legitimate high scores. So, how does this all relate to packattack? Given rapid pausing was a known strategy when packattack competed, and the proof requirements at the time were insufficient to strictly enforce a ban, the possibility of him having used it was always there. The main reason his scores went effectively unquestioned for so many years was because we believed that Jekyll was the fabled player to eventually rival them. Jekyll had replicated almost every insane strategy that only packattack had done, with A11 being the only exception, and even then he came pretty close. In most cases, Jekyll had not only rivaled but surpassed packattack's level of skill and toppled legendary world records nobody thought could be beaten. His decision to go above and beyond to create a fake live play of his E9 score, something we thought was impossible to doctor and definitive proof of a score not being pause abused, served greatly to dispel any possible suspicions of his other scores for which he only provided a replay. This fake live play not only gave huge credence to Jekyll's own scores, but inadvertently to packattack's as well, because if Jekyll was capable of them, then why couldn't packattack be? You can still find old comments from me defending packattack purely on this basis. As you would probably expect, once the news broke that packattack's only true rival was in fact a massive liar and cheater, his own absurd scores on these floors would start to look extremely dubious themselves. After all, with Jekyll's scores being wiped from the community leaderboards, packattack would be reclaiming every world record only Jekyll had beaten, so it was more important than ever to try and determine if he had cheated as well. Going into the investigation, there were a handful of factors that made proving packattack's legitimacy one way or the other a considerable pain in the arse. The main problem we faced was the fact that we only had replays of packattack's scores to analyse, which would not provide any objective proof in a cheating investigation, as there's no surefire way to prove if a score was rapid paused or not from a replay alone. Though rapid pausing can sometimes be comically obvious from frantic and jerky adjustments along wires that were obviously not performed in real time, it can also be completely undetectable, and any analysis we did would always be subjective, as there's no smoking gun or dancing cheese to be found. It's also worth noting that, unlike in some other games, the replay files themselves do not store player input data, so even if we had those to reverse engineer, they too would be of little to no use in an investigation. Given this, concrete evidence was potentially outright impossible to come by, so we had to heavily rely upon circumstantial evidence from events that took place over 20 years ago on websites that no longer exist, as well as the accounts of players who were active in the early 2000s to form a basis for our decision. Ultimately, the investigation uncovered three-ish pieces of evidence that were more than substantive enough to make an informed decision, beyond a reasonable doubt, on whether or not his scores should remain on our leaderboards. That being said, in the face of no concrete evidence, I want to err on the side of caution and state that the conclusion of the investigation is not a 100% definitive fact in this video. This doesn't mean that I have significant doubts with our findings, just that I'm being careful, so please bear that in mind despite all I'm about to show you, and feel free to draw whatever conclusions you like. The first piece of evidence to discuss is packattack's submission history. Since both CLO and Elite scores have been defunct for over a decade, and a catastrophic server failure in early 2005 caused Cyberscore to lose their entire high score database up until that point, we have to rely on the Wayback Machine to find this information in archived snapshots of CLO. As I mentioned earlier, packattack's scores on E9 are the most important to scrutinise, as this was the floor he most actively submitted insane scores to in the surviving archives, so we will only focus on this floor for the time being. In the earliest archive of the CLO leaderboards from the 14th of June 2002, packattack is in 4th place on E9 with a score of 15,570, over 10,000 points shy of his eventual best, and a very average score by today's standards. Moving forward to the 16th of August, packattack's score has already skyrocketed to 25,692, a better score than any legitimate player has since been able to achieve, and one you would expect to take a tremendous amount of time and effort to work up to. Thankfully, by going to packattack's personal high score topic in the forums, we can see exactly how long his arduous grind for this score was, and every improvement he submitted leading up to it. But before we look at those scores, let me first briefly go over the best scores performed in recent years to help put them into perspective. All the scores we're going to look at are from the current best wire player by far, Eddie0777. If a floor contains any kind of wire, Eddie is drawn to it like a monkey to a banana, and he has sunk in hundreds of hours practicing and refining his movement to become a master at this skill. On E9 alone, he has put in 200 hours of playtime, culminating in him being the first player to perform multiple benchmark achievements with a live play, and has gone above and beyond to provide all kinds of extra measures to ensure his efforts are recognised as legit. For the purposes of this video, there are 3 main E9 strategies to consider. The point 1 only strat, a completion of the point 1 path fast enough to finish with the time bonus. The 3 wire strat, a completion of the point 1, point 2 and point 3 paths that finishes in the goal. And the 25k strat, a completion of both the point 1 and point 2 paths fast enough to finish with the time bonus. The point 1 only strat has a minimum possible score of 18,002, and Eddie's best finish is with a score of 21,110, despite his wire completion being about 7 seconds faster than what any other player has done in a live play. Eddie would have you believe that this score is total garbage, as he once had another run that was 2 seconds faster, but bonked the ending platform and died. This failed run was the result of around 40 hours spent solely trying to complete the point 1 path as fast as he possibly could, and assuming it finished, we can estimate his best theoretical score to be around 21,430. The 3 wire strat has a minimum possible score of 22,001 and has only been completed in a live play by 2 players. Eddie has the fastest completion with a score of 23,633. As for the 25k strat, Eddie is currently the only player with wire speeds anywhere near fast enough to feasibly complete it, and he became the first player to do so in a live play earlier this year at the end of his 200-hour grind. The minimum possible score is 25,002, and Eddie achieved a 25,190. Consider these scores as a baseline for what is realistically achievable by a human after hundreds of hours of practice, and bear them in mind as we look at the kind of scores packattack was achieving and how long it supposedly took him. The first thing you should notice is that his score from the June archive is lower than the minimum possible score for the point 1 only strat. That's because it was most likely set without even touching the point 1 path at all, and only requires a completion of the point 2 path with the time bonus. This is still a very average score, even for the strat. Packattack posted his first improvement to this score in his forum topic on the 13th of July, and stated the following.
Hell must have just froze over at 12:49 AM, because I did the impossible, for me at least. I suck horribly at wires, just trust me, but I just got 20,186 on E9. That is one level I figured I would never try, and to be honest, I had been too intimidated by it to ever try it before.
Less than 3 hours later, he posted another E9 score, having now already beaten Eddie's fastest point 1 path completion. Then, the next day, he posted a better point 1 only score than Eddie's theoretical best. He followed these posts with an array of new scores over the subsequent days, literally going from being unable to set a score that even touched the .1 path to the best wire player in the history of the game in a matter of days. He eventually landed on his 25,692 on the 23rd of July, meaning in just 10 days he achieved a better score than what Eddie was capable of after 200 hours spread across 8 months, a score that would still be the world record had packattack not beaten it himself. While this dramatic leap in skill in such a short space of time is obviously very unlikely and suspicious, it becomes exponentially more dubious when you consider the point in time when it happened.
Rapid pausing was banned for ILs as soon as it was officially discovered in mid-2002. Ferret Druid was the first known player to use it, and it was he who revealed it. For months, I was the only player that could do the .1 path on E9, and I did not pause. Then, out of the blue, Ferret Druid beat my E9 score multiple times. He shared his replay, which some people noticed was strangely jerky. Not long after, Ferret voluntarily revealed that he had paused the game rapidly, and it was decided that the technique would be banned.
SD Kess's recollection is corroborated by the 14th of June archive. Here, SD Kess is in second place with his 18,020 score, and Ferret Druid is in first with 21,092. According to site updates from Fro, this was actually Ferret's first submission to the rankings, being posted as early as March, where it stood as the world record until he eventually surpassed it himself twice on the 6th of July. Now, we know these scores are rapid paused because Ferret Druid eventually admitted that they were, and it's clear that when he submitted them, SD Kess wasn't yet privy to what technique was in play, given his hilarious response the next day.
After wondering for a long time how it was possible to ride thin wires like you do, I came to the conclusion that you must have reflexes bordering on precognition.
According to SD Kess, the subsequent conversation that concluded with rapid pausing being disallowed took place not on Clo, but on GameFAQs, the more active SMB message board at the time. Unfortunately, GameFAQs routinely purge topics after a certain period of time, and as far as I can tell, the initial public reveal of rapid pausing has sadly not been archived. SD Kess was able to clarify that the reveal was likely soon after Ferret posted his new scores on the 6th of July, and that he was definitely aware of it by the time Super Monkey Ball 2 was released on the 25th of August, giving us a time frame for rapid pausing being publicly revealed between the 7th of July and the 25th of August. And when did packattack suddenly become a god at E9? The 13th of July. Without meaning to go off on too much of a tangent at the moment, the situation with Ferret Druid is really rather bizarre. Even though he apparently openly admitted to rapid pausing, it appears as though none of his scores were ever removed from the Clo leaderboards, and SD Kess told me the following when I asked him why this seemed to be the case.
The Ferret Druid situation is peculiar. He admitted rapid pausing on his first wire scores and retracted them, but he still submitted scores later on those same floors that were very high. I figured that they were probably rapid paused as well, but we were on an honor system. I just accepted that he had to live with himself if he had cheated. He was also one of the 3 site moderators, so it wasn't a simple thing to question him.
At this point in the investigation, I decided to reach out to Ferret Druid directly to see what he could remember about rapid pausing and if he could clear the air as to why his scores were never removed, and he shared with me a few important details in the context of the investigation.
Yeah, I remember rapid pausing. I'm not sure I discovered it, but it was something that we talked about privately, me and packattack and some of the other players. I vaguely remember a forum discussion between a couple of other guys about whether it should be allowed or not, or if there should be a separate category for those scores. That's about all I can remember about it. Even if I participated in that conversation at all, I couldn't tell you. I do remember not wanting to participate in that discussion very much, because in the back of my head I knew I had used it, and at the time did not want to think of it as cheating. So it was kind of a shameful thing. Like I just used it willy-nilly, not even remembering which scores of mine were rapid paused or not. I just wanted it to not be a thing, so justified not removing them to myself since I hadn't maintained any world records. I know I was the first one to find a good number of the best strats, and that was very satisfying. When they were beaten by others, even if I had rapid paused to find the strat, I knew it was a legitimate strat and not because of rapid pause, or so I thought.
So, Ferret admits he used rapid pausing
willy-nilly,
and that he most likely didn't remove some of his rapid paused scores from the rankings as he was content that they had been beaten. But the more notable point to deduct here is that he remembers discussing it privately, specifically with packattack. This means that packattack was not only aware of the technique, possibly even before it was publicly revealed, but was also likely aware that Ferret had been using it to set scores that were never removed from the rankings, a possible motive for cheating. It all seems to perfectly add up when looking at his submission history. Packattack's first E9 improvement was posted only 7 days after Ferret drew its own, and those two were trading records back and forth on E9 and inventing new strategies over the following days. It's hard to believe that one of these players was rapid pausing, whereas the other magically discovered he was naturally capable of equally as good and even better scores after simply deciding to try. On the same day packattack posted his first crazy E9 score, he also posted new scores on both A11 and E45. I haven't yet spoken about E45 in this video, but this flaw has historically been a magnet for cheaters. The optimal strategy is one of the hardest known in the game, as it requires riding along the narrow edge of a rotating platform, a strategy highly susceptible to pause abuse and one that Ferret Druid pioneered shortly after he came onto the scene. Similarly to E9, Ferret is comfortably in first place in the 14th of June archive, and packattack has an average score by today's standards using a much easier strategy. Then suddenly, on the 13th of July, he became the second player to complete the optimal strat, something he did at least 3 more times before finally surpassing Ferret's score in 2004. If you're wondering about the other legendary scores I mentioned earlier, packattack achieved none of them prior to the 13th of July. They were all set at various points afterwards. It wasn't until a few months later that he performed his eventual 26,422 on E9. A11, E9 and E45 are 3 of the most obvious flaws where rapid pausing can be abused, and coincidentally, the same flaws packattack's crazy scores first started to crop up. If he was rapid pausing these early scores, it logically follows he would go on to achieve even crazier scores on even more flaws as he became more experienced with the technique and found new potential applications. We found nothing to suggest otherwise. Now at this point, let me address the elephant in the room. Given these circumstances, it frankly looks obvious exactly what packattack was doing. And if the only other player with comparable scores publicly admitted to rapid pausing around this time, why on earth did nobody suspect packattack of doing the same?
I do have another story that I want to tell. I first found the Super Monkey Ball community on GameFAQs in January of 2002. Almost nobody had a capture card back then, so any videos were a real treat. Snapdragon was the star of the community, but players like myself and packattack were on the rise. I remember there was a point where almost everyone thought packattack was a liar/cheater, including Snapdragon. I also had my suspicions, but I tempered it with the fact that there was no objective evidence. People would spend hours on scores only to have packattack post a score beating it, sometimes within minutes. I remember even getting irritated myself because he would beat some of my brand new world records before the update program was run to make them official. Nobody believed that anybody could be that good. The community confronted him, demanded proof, and almost ran him off. Given that I was one of the only people that didn't join in on the bashing, and the fact that I had a capture card, he decided to send me a tape with basically all of his world record replays. I captured as many as I could, which provided him with sweet vindication. He was proven to be almost superhuman in spite of the doubters, and it seemed foolish to doubt him again after so many people were wrong.
Although the confrontation SDKS mentioned apparently took place on GameFAQs, there are posts from packattack on Clo asking SDKS if he had received the videotape at the beginning of August, so these cheating accusations were from right after packattack's newly gained E9 prowess. In the same topic, Deku Sprout, another top player from the era, was clearly excited to see packattack's replays and prompted him to share some more astonishing claims about his proficiency on the 0.1 wire.
It's hard to say how fast I do each wire. I know I can do the 0.1 on the actual wire time in 7 seconds. Then I do the 0.2 at a decent speed and did the 0.3 kind of slow. I am consistent on the 0.1. I can consistently do the 0.1 in 11 to 15 seconds. I would say I complete it 75% of the time once I get warmed up. I do not ever try to wiggle to stay balanced, but at times I can't help it. I know my replays aren't as jerky as Ferret's old E9.
When SD Kesh received the tape, he uploaded a select few replays to his website Elite Coder, which then served to erase most suspicions players may have had at the time. Amazingly, Elite Coder is still online today, and the replays he posted can be downloaded from the directory pack for us to analyze. However, SD Kesh could do one better.
Regarding the VHS tape with packattack's replays, I actually found it this weekend. I might just DVR the whole thing and upload it somewhere for y'all to look at. It has a lot of E9 and A11 replays on it.
With the entire tape, we now had access to over an hour's worth of previously unseen replays from packattack. Despite replays having no surefire way of proving a score one way or the other, we can still use them as a basis to assess the likelihood of the scores being rapid paused. If the wire movement is smooth, deliberate and natural, it's more likely to be legit, and if it's extremely erratic, unstable and jerky, it's more likely to have been rapid paused. Given replays from this tape absolved packattack of cheating in the past, the question is, would they result in the same outcome 20 years later? When I said earlier that rapid pausing can sometimes be comically obvious, I would struggle to find better replays to illustrate that point than what you just watched. Almost every single wire completion has moments of horribly frantic and jerky adjustments that are almost impossible to believe were done in real time. And don't just take my word for it, compare his movement to anyone else's and the difference is night and day. As the saying goes, if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. Or I guess in this case, if it looks like a monkey having a seizure on a tightrope, then it's probably a rapid paused replay. Even the replays that were uploaded to Elite Coder were anything but convincing. This one looks as though he's purposely trying to make it look as rapid paused as possible. Either that or he was being electrocuted while playing, I can't quite tell. To give some defense to the community who believed these at the time, I'm speaking with 20 more years of hindsight to look back on. When these videos were posted, players probably didn't know what rapid paused replays looked like, so you can't really blame them for taking them at face value. That being said, there were still some folk from the era who weren't fully convinced.
I'm pretty sure I first learned about rapid pausing through an AIM conversation with Smiling Jack. I do remember that when packattack posted his first crazy E9 score, he commented something like, "Hell must have just frozen over. I suck at wires, but I just got this score," which never made sense to me because a score like that doesn't just accidentally happen because you got lucky. After his initial score, he would also post a new one every day, it seemed like. So he went from sucking at wires to being able to complete the 0.1 wire at full speed over and over again, quite literally overnight. I think the community was pretty naive and innocent back then, so no one really thought to question it. It wasn't until a while later, like maybe after Super Monkey Ball 2 was already out, that Smiling Jack told me about the rapid pausing technique, and it was kind of like an aha moment where it all clicked. Like that's obviously what packattack was doing. I remember trying it and getting a fast completion of the E9.1 wire in maybe 10 minutes, and the replay looked practically identical to packattack's. Smiling Jack and I briefly talked about bringing it up on the forum, but didn't want to cause an uproar, and it seemed like competitive Super Monkey Ball 1 gameplay was dying down anyway. Looking back, it's pretty crazy that it was never questioned because some of his replays, specifically the end of his infamous A11, are so obviously fake it's comical, but I guess that just goes to show how different things were back then.
The bottom line is, if anyone submitted these scores as proof nowadays, no one would believe them, and there's not a chance in hell, frozen over or otherwise, that the scores would be allowed anywhere near the leaderboards. On top of this, another key detail to note that was only made possible by now having the full tape is the timestamps the replays were saved. A bunch of these scores were set literally minutes apart. The laundry list of insane things to believe to still consider packattack a legitimate player keeps growing longer. With everything thus far strongly pointing toward packattack having rapid paused, did the investigation uncover anything that supported his legitimacy? Well, the evidence is scant, but there was something worth talking about.
I do remember seeing a video from packattack where he scooted around the 0.1 path on E9 with ease from a live non-replay recording. My memory of the video is very faded. I remember thinking it was impressive and he went pretty fast, although not as fast as on his top scores. It wasn't live, as in streamed live or done on command. I believe it was recorded on VHS and then captured, but it was definitely not from a replay. It was enough to dispel any doubt that I and others may have had at the time.
Packattack sent me an unedited clip at one point of him hauling ass on the 0.1 wire successfully on multiple consecutive attempts too.
One story I recall about packattack, not sure if you stumbled upon this, but there was a time he uploaded a live play of himself doing the E9.1 wire, twice in a row if memory serves.
If this live play still existed, it could either hold a lot of weight in favour of packattack's legitimacy, or potentially contain conclusive proof of cheating if it were fake, in similar fashion to how Jekyll was caught in 2021. Of course, this live play was one of the most elusive things brought up in the investigation, and the video seems to have been completely lost to time. The most relevant thing I found regarding it was a forum topic from 2004 discussing a consistency video from packattack in which he completed the E9.1 path twice in a row at full speed, which lines up with what both Deku Sprout and Smiling Jack could remember. The players in the thread actually seemed somewhat dissatisfied with the video, saying that they'd have preferred packattack provide a longer clip around 10 minutes in length to better demonstrate his consistency. A very reasonable ask if he truly could complete the 0.1 path in 11 to 15 seconds 75% of the time as he claimed. Later in the thread, DekuSprout mentions that he doesn't think the video was uploaded to any of the main video repositories and was only being shared privately over AIM, which is probably why I had no success in finding it. It's almost as though packattack wanted the video to maintain a low profile. But why? Well, despite having never seen the video, this too started to seem suspect, as both SDKess and Smiling Jack specifically remembered a rather dubious detail.
I've been thinking about the E9 live play that I saw from packattack many years ago. I don't think it had sound. Whenever I think about what I saw, there isn't any sound accompanying the visual. I think I even asked about the sound at the time, and it was explained as a problem with the capture process.
This was strange, as everything else packattack uploaded at the time had audio. Obviously, the audio is the hard part to fix if you splice out the pausing, as you've discussed in detail in other videos. So even at the time, this strengthened my suspicions, although it's all circumstantial.
Obviously, without having the actual video to analyze, we can't possibly draw any reasonable conclusions from this piece of evidence. Having now covered all of the evidence pertaining to if packattack rapid paused, I want to spend some time addressing another question the investigation sought to answer. Did packattack knowingly cheat? At first I assumed the two issues would go hand in hand. If packattack submitted rapid paused scores, he broke the rules and therefore cheated. But the question is a little more nuanced depending on your definition of cheating. The reason for looking into this was because, beyond some players' memories, there is no evidence of rapid pausing being explicitly banned on Clo. Some of the old players I spoke to had never even heard of rapid pausing, and others, including the site owner, had no memory of it outright being banned. It seems like a topic that was seldom discussed on the site, as I only found a single mention of it in the surviving forum archives, though the general sentiment was made clear. It wasn't until the Clo rankings moved to Elite scores that an official ruling was eventually written in the most needlessly long-winded way possible. The ruling bans rapid pausing specifically, and not another type of pause abuse known at the time as perfect timing strats that have since also been banned. Interestingly, this rule was only written on the SMB2 page and not SMB1, presumably because the aforementioned perfect timing strats were only known in SMB2 at the time, so the ruling was made to make the distinction that one type of pausing was allowed while the other wasn't. It's safe to assume that this meant rapid pausing was also banned in the other games, because it would make no sense whatsoever for it only to be banned in SMB2. Although packattack did submit some equally insane scores after this pausing rule was established, the main scores in question were all submitted to Clo, where it's unclear based on surviving evidence if rapid pausing was ever actually banned. As such, I decided to ask the most active and involved players from the era who I was in touch with how they came to believe rapid pausing was disallowed, and if they thought there was any chance that packattack somehow thought it was fair game.
I discovered rapid pausing on my own when playing the game. I brought it up both privately with individuals I was chatting with, and I think started a thread on the message boards about it. I forget exactly, but I recall the sentiment around rapid pausing to range from disallowed to extremely frowned upon. I don't believe it was ever clearly, explicitly banned. I do think it was generally accepted that none of the top players were using it as a strategy.
I've mentioned before that most of the discussion about rapid pausing took place on GameFAQs right after it came to light. At that time, I'd say that the GameFAQs community was larger and more active than Clo, and I think there was a desire to get community input rather than make a unilateral decision about the matter. There was an informal vote, and banning the tactic got more votes than allowing the tactic. More than one person said they would quit competing altogether if pausing was allowed. Thereafter, it was definitely something that wasn't talked about much officially, but I think people like myself preferred not to give ideas to people that didn't know about it.
As far as I can remember, rapid pausing was never brought up or discussed on Clo. We were a community primarily built on trust in the honor system, just having fun with a game that we all enjoyed. I think that even if the technique was widely known, it would have been obvious to everyone that it should be disallowed for competitive scores.
I believe I first learned about rapid pausing when packattack brought it up to me, and in private AIM convos using uncharacteristically vulgar language in no uncertain terms that he thought it was cheating, accusing Smiling Jack of being a cheater specifically on the basis that he said Smiling Jack was rapid pausing. Lots of trash talking. I don't know for sure what level packattack was accusing Smiling Jack of using rapid pausing to gain an advantage, but I want to say it was E9. He definitely wanted me to think Smiling Jack was a cheater for rapid pausing. That said, I do not know with 100% certainty when, or even if to be honest, rapid pausing was officially and explicitly banned per CLO rules as a technique.
Packattack was central enough to the community that I'm confident he understood the sentiment around rapid pausing. I don't have proof of this, but if I remember correctly, he explicitly stated that his scores were not rapid paused, and his audioless E9.1 wire video was supposed to be evidence of this. Also, it must have been obvious to him that he was the only top player using this technique, given the enormous gap between his E9 and A11 scores and everyone else's.
Anyone could have retracted their scores with no shame once the pausing tactic became known and disallowed. In fact, I asked both Ferret and packattack privately on AIM if they paused on their E9 scores. Their answers were yes and no, respectively.
I do not think it's at all possible that packattack was unaware of if it was allowed. And since he made it abundantly clear that he thought it was cheating...
Deku Sprout's comment in particular is hilarious to me, because Smiling Jack's E9 replay is an instance where the movement is so natural, I don't think you could convince me it was rapid paused even if it was true. The adjustments are all so careful and deliberate, it's obviously real, and a stark contrast to the absolute bedlam in all of packattack's replays. As far as Cyberscore goes, that's its own separate website with its own separate set of rules to CLO or Elite scores. When I presented our findings to their mod team, they quickly agreed packattack most likely rapid paused and removed his most suspect scores, however decided to deem it not cheating, but rather taking advantage of improper handling. Given packattack was probably the most high-profile user of their website, even having served as a moderator for a period of time, it makes sense they would come up with any daft old excuse so as to not have it reflect badly on their site. In all fairness, it does seem as though there was also no explicit ruling banning rapid pausing on Cyberscore at the time packattack submitted his scores. However, there was a site-wide ruling clearly banning pause abuse established in 2012 while packattack was still actively submitting to the site. This ruling was brought up in this forum discussion that packattack was a part of. He even said himself he thinks it is absurd and pointless in games that are 90% reaction, and that he always thought it was lame and extremely cheap. One of the site admins I presented the evidence to shows up in this thread too, and gives an official stance on the matter, stating if the pause abuse allows frame perfection to the point that it removes the need for skillful input by the player, it is not allowed. In other words, it should have been obvious to packattack that if he had rapid pause monkey ball scores submitted to Cyberscore, they shouldn't be there. This same site admin went on to make a post on Discord addressing the situation after removing packattack's scores, claiming credit for our investigation as if they had anything to do with it. I'm not aware of any investigation this person apparently did, but to be clear, they had no involvement in anything I've covered in this video, and it was almost entirely my own work. In fact, based on what they're saying here, I'm not sure they even bothered to read the 21-page long dossier I sent to them detailing all my findings. The last thing I want to discuss in this video is packattack's response to the investigation. On 3 separate occasions, I've tried emailing him regarding his monkey ball scores, the first time being in 2019, before I ever suspected him of cheating. At the time, I was working on a different project regarding rapid pausing, and asked him some general questions about his thoughts on the technique. I emailed him for the first time after the investigation started in 2021, presenting him with the evidence we had accumulated thus far to give him a fair chance to refute or comment on anything he wanted. I then emailed him for the final time earlier this year in a last-ditch effort for him to speak up and to inform him that I was working on the video you're currently watching. In all three cases, packattack did not respond. Although silence doesn't necessarily imply guilt, it's certainly not a good look. Anything related to Monkey Ball is seemingly a sore subject for him, which is odd for someone who was such an integral figure in competition for almost a decade. This is further evidenced by the only SMB related activity we've seen from packattack in recent years, him privating all his YouTube uploads of his replays out of the blue. I should note that this happened prior to any substantiated cheating accusations or the start of the investigation, but as before, this is a weird thing to do given how much time he devoted to achieving those scores. My best guess is that packattack wants to move on from Monkey Ball and leave his scores behind him, which is fine, but something the community can never truly do without him addressing the evidence and giving us closure. That's the unfortunate reality of the situation. Following the investigation, the community was left with no reasonable choice but to wipe the leaderboards of packattack's remaining records. Additionally, I will be unlisting my top 10 oldest unbeaten high scores video, as 9 of the 10 scores on the list were from packattack and I no longer trust them to be legit. I can understand why some people may be apprehensive to take action like this without direct admission or concrete proof, but in this instance, the mountain of circumstantial evidence all pointing towards the same conclusion is too much to ignore. It can all effectively be boiled down to one decision. Either packattack went from self-admittedly sucking at wires to the best wire player in the game's history literally overnight, during the short time frame rapid pausing became a publicly known technique, traded world records back and forth with a known cheater, set scores that are echelons above the ability of any legitimate player and were only ever beaten by another cheater, and has movement unlike anyone else's that exactly matches rapid paused movement, or packattack rapid paused. There comes a point where the benefit of the doubt can no longer be justifiably given, and the evidence brought forth in this investigation landed us far beyond that point. With no response from packattack, we're left with no choice but to speculate on potential motives for cheating. As I alluded to earlier, I think the most probable reason is that packattack knew Ferret Druid rapid paused, and if Ferret never removed his own scores, then why should packattack remove his? He would have cheated to beat another cheater, setting the bar for his apparent and expected skill level while he was at it, leading him to cheat even more scores later down the line. Still, this doesn't mean that packattack wasn't a talented Monkey Ball player and didn't have any genuine achievements. He was first on the overall rankings and clearly the best player around before any of the rapid pausing business came about. Though his scores from that time frame aren't much to boast about nowadays, it was an impressive level of dominance nonetheless. Not to mention, rapid pausing has its limitations and won't result in free world records on every floor in the game, and packattack held plenty of records on floors that aren't particularly susceptible to the technique. Some people have contentions with my opinion on this, but I personally believe most of those scores were probably legit. Unless packattack says something, we'll never know. And that's the worst part of this conclusion. There's lots of things we'll never know. There's every chance there were others from the era who submitted rapid pause scores that flew under the radar. It's sort of inevitable when you're operating on an honor system where cheating is not only extremely easy to do, but impossible to be proven. People are going to take advantage of that. It leaves us with quite the conundrum, because it's not like the community can easily go and beat every old record now that live plays are a requirement. Definitely not given some of packattacks are outright impossible to compete with. I think it would be incredibly unfair on legitimate players to disregard or nullify every old score that was only proven by a replay, so we're left only to use our best judgment on what's real and what's not, though we may never have a full list of world records we know are legit. The game's true competitive history will forever remain laced with unanswered questions and uncertainty. Thanks for watching everyone, cheers.
Think that we won't get better. It's the long story, and it's not so far away. But you know I'm here to stay. I'm here to stay. I'm here to stay. Stagger home after midnight. Sleep on the dawn in a stairwell. We'll fall apart on the weekend. Nights go on and on and on. Stagger home after midnight. Sleep on the dawn in the stairwell. We'll fall apart on the weekend. I can't keep your voice out of my head. That we won't get better. It's the long start, and it's not so far away.